At the very last verse of Joshua chapter 6. Yeah, I know we've spent over a week and a half going through Joshua chapter 6, but it's a significant chapter. Thanks for sticking with me. So at the very last verse, it says, "So the Lord was with Joshua." And I like that word, "so." It's kind of like saying, see, the Lord was with Joshua. And that's significant when you think about where Joshua was at the beginning of Joshua chapter 6. At the beginning of Joshua chapter 6, Jericho's walls were still standing. People inside Jericho still felt incredibly confident that the Israelites would never get in. The Israelites were still very, very scared. No one had ever seen Joshua take down a city of this size, or an army of that size, or that skill. They were trying to do something that nobody had ever done before. And so if you were a betting person, if you were going to decide how much of a bet to place on Joshua, the new leader of the Israelites, remember, he was still pretty fresh, pretty wet behind the ears, replacing Moses, who had been there for 40 years. And here comes Joshua, the new guy, with a substantial challenge. If you're a betting person, you probably, honestly, you would have bet against him. But God didn't. And not necessarily because Joshua was so great, but because God has such a great ability to keep his promises for people he loves. And that's what he did. So you go through the chapter, and by the time you get to the end, Jericho's walls had fallen, the army had been taken, Joshua proved himself to be a capable leader, and something that had never before been accomplished was accomplished, and accomplished in a really incredible way. And so all those things happen. The city belongs to the Israelites, and we're told, so the Lord was with Joshua. So, I guess the Lord really could keep his promise. See, God knows what he's doing. Or another way of saying it and thinking about this whole chapter is, remember, the beginning does not determine the end. God does. Your God does. And boy, do we have beginnings that make it hard for us to anticipate a good and blessed end. The beginning of a cancer journey. The beginning of suddenly living without someone you love. The beginning of unemployment. The beginning of rejection. The beginning of a certain pain. The beginning of a stretch in life where you feel so lonely and full of anxiety and beaten on. The beginning of having to live with regret from something you did or something you failed to do. The beginning does not determine the end. Remember that God is well aware of all of our beginnings, those hard beginnings, the ones that happen to us and the ones that we bring on ourselves. And yet he still makes the promise that your end is going to be the best one of all. It's one where you will see with your own eyes that God really was with you every step of the way. And remember who's making that promise. It's a God who knows what it looked like on a dark Friday. It looked like God didn't have the ability to keep a good promise. It looked like God was too weak to help his people as he hung there on a cross. It looked like there was no hope. But perfect hope is exactly what he gave us that day, when he wiped away any reason in our own lives for us to worry about our future with God. And then a couple of days later, he showed the whole world once and for all that our God really does have the ability to do anything. Even if he has to beat death in order to make it happen. The beginning does not determine the end. Your God does. Your God, He already did. So, rest well tonight, my friend.